jump right up. I'm getting a mic, but it's loud enough that if someone wants to pop up. Oh, go ahead.
There's been a lot of discussion about transition to a new mayor. And I was at a little meeting in that tent, the transition tent Sunday, and I was thrilled that I wasn't the only one thinking this. People said, well, how do we know what's going to go on? How are we going to read? How are we going to get informed? I mean, how many of us there could come here? I'm retired. And the only thing that came up was blogs. And, maybe they could give us all a bunch of blogs. But I think we have to think about that. And I know that in the agendas of the food forums, they were talking about food democracy and how we should have a food policy council. Is that a viable way for normal people who are not wonks to get some kind of information about what's in danger of being cut and what hearings are going on and how we could all, come down and make a lot of noise? What would you suggest for the people who cannot sit in this audience, who care very much?
Okay. Triada, you want to take a crack at that?
That's a tough one, actually. I mean, I one of the things that I encounter again and again, and everyone on my team and in my organization encounters again and again, is just how little average New Yorkers know about what's happening. For a while, we were tabling at green markets because New York farmers, of course, stand to lose the redemption of SNAP benefits. And we had a couple of people at a table with a sign that just said, ask me about how the Farm Bill affects New York City. And for an hour to 2 hours, on the days that they stood and we went to every borough, they would get mobbed. I mean, conversations would start. It would start small. One person or a couple of people would be like, what are you here for? But once the conversation started, other people would join in. Other people would get closer to listen and want to know why they didn't know about that before. So I share your frustration. I think this is someone everyone should know and clearly doesn't. And in every venue, big or small, that we've had the opportunity to talk about this, there is somebody who is learning something new and hearing it for the first time and whose eyes are open to what is going on. And I think sometimes because these conversations are primarily happening in Congress, in Washington, among people, I mean, I think if this were a City Hall conversation, it would be much different, right? We're in a media market that's hundreds of miles away. New York thinks it's far more important than Washington, and generally it is. And so, the attention is peripheral, but it's so incredibly important. So I don't have a good answer for you, but I will tell everybody here, because not everybody gets City Council hearing notices, but the City Council General Welfare Committee's annual hearing on hunger in New York City is happening next Monday at 1 o'clock. So that is a place where any member of the public can go and have your voice heard, and we can at least let our members of the City Council know what it is that we think about what's going on. And Council Member Annabelle Palma, and of course I can't speak to the validity of any of these rumors, but is being spoken of as a potential candidate for Speaker. And she chairs the General Welfare Committee, and so she's an important person to raise one's voice to at this point.
One other answer to that question, or at least thing to think about, is faith-based organizations. I mean, basically, if you want to educate people, you have to reach them where they are, and where are people gathered in New York and in communities across the country, and faith organizations are. So somehow that we need to enlist churches, synagogues, mosques, the whole range, in this education. I think Bread for the World does some of it within the church category. The Food Bank and the New York City Coalition Against Hunger do some of it with all the church-affiliated kitchens and pantries. But, when the need escalates, the pressure on the kitchens and pantries becomes to get more food in, and there's less time for educating volunteers about public policy just when they need it most. But anyway, that is part of what I think we need to do.
And I would also say, just on that note, I'm going to show my colors here. Before I was a graduate student, I was a union organizer. So I think it's important to also think about how to organize and think about that in smart ways. And honestly, there are some organizations that I think are doing a pretty good job of this, but in a lot of these emergency food programs, there are a huge number of people who are directly invested in these issues, and it's the people who are coming in to eat. And so I think there's some room to do some more organizing on that level. I think Neighbors Together is doing some interesting work with this, and I think they're a pretty good model. Also, in terms of the faith-based organizing, there's been some groups who are working on public health who have really directly enlisted members of the clergy in engaging their congregation. Thank you. The word was slipping my mind. Who've been engaging their congregations in conversations about eating well and in various public health issues. But I think that's a good suggestion in terms of engaging congregations on some of these maybe related public health issues, but that are related to some of this policy stuff. And I think there's some alliances that could be built there. I think there's a lot of organizing work that could be done. And I would love to see more of that happening. And I think there's a lot of potential for that. And I think actually the fact that Bill de Blasio got elected makes me very hopeful for the potential of that working, at least at the city level.
The Food Policy Center wants to be a resource for the groups working on these issues.
Hi. So I realized that this discussion has been more about the history of food stamps and how to get more food stamps in general, but has there been any thought of what food stamps can get you? Because I know that earlier this year, the Health Commissioner, Dr. Farley, had suggested that we invest more in fruits and vegetables as opposed to getting post cereal or muffins and cookies, that kind of stuff, because in my opinion, families of low income, they get the food stamps and they just want to get anything. And that's fine, because then they'll eat. But, I think we also have to make sure that what they're getting is nutritious and can help them grow and, not get infected with all the things that those, cereals and muffins and cookies have. So I just wanted to gather your thoughts on that.
I just want to say, I think that that's an important point, and I think actually when we think about how to change the conversation, because I think one of the things that's happening around at least around some of the proposals floating around in Congress right now, is that they do feel very common sense to people. This is why it's safe for Democrats to be saying some of this stuff. But I think the other thing that is becoming common sense is that people know that on a SNAP budget, you can't really buy healthy food, and we have a public health crisis. And I think that's also common sense. And so I think in terms of changing the conversation, some of this stuff around health is really important. Tricky, but important for really, if we want to make an argument about how to increase benefit levels, I think that's going to be an important thing to keep raising, saying, look, we're facing this public health crisis, and it's going to be very expensive, and an easier way to deal with this is to actually allow people to get healthier
Well,
food.
and the research shows, and I think this gets to, this at heart goes back to the insufficiency of SNAP benefits. Mm-hmm. The research shows that every additional dollar of SNAP benefits improves the nutritional index of the recipient's diet. So if they're eating poorly now, and we know people are eating poorly now, it is largely because they don't have enough to eat well. And that's why you also see what I was saying before, 60% of emergency food recipients saying that it's their main source that the food pantry is their main source of protein, 40% saying that food pantries are their main source of produce. What's the cheapest thing to buy in a supermarket? What's going to make your benefits go the farthest? It's not going to be, meats and dairy. It's going to be grains and other staples. It's going to be the cereals, the rice, and the things that you can get cheap and in bulk. And if you can get greens at a food pantry or soup kitchen And you can in New York City. I mean, that's something where there's been a tremendous investment on the part of public and private funders to improve the nutritional quality of food in the emergency food system. So if you can get those things at a food pantry or soup kitchen, I mean, people aren't dumb. They can do math. They know how far their benefit dollars will go. And if a food pantry is available to them to round out the month, they're going to be very strategic about what they bring home from that food pantry or soup kitchen because their buying dollars will only get them so far. So I think, I think there does need to be a conversation about nutritional quality, but I think it needs to be done with an awareness of the actual benefit amounts and what that buys, because oftentimes these conversations happen in this hypothetical realm as if anything is purchasable and possible in the lives of people who are actually trying to live on, what amounts to, right now, post-cuts, less than $1.40 per person per meal.
So I think just one other element in that or two. What is it? Food costs in New York City are about 30% above the national average.
Pretty crazy.
The low-cost food plan as an alternate basis for SNAP benefits is about 30% higher than the thrifty food plan, the one that we use. So New Yorkers have a special, an intensified reason to argue for a higher SNAP benefit level. And I think we need to be making that argument, even though it seems absurd when there's a group in power talking about cutting. We need to be articulating the demand to make the SNAP program workable within the health context. And the other thing we need to be doing is changing the subsidy structure at the national level so that we make fruits and vegetables comparatively cheaper and highly processed grain-based and sugar-based products, corn-based products, comparatively more expensive. So we need to...
And what Jan's talking about is a source of tremendous frustration in the advocacy community. Because we've been on defense for so long, we really don't have the resources or time or space to have the conversation that we need to have about switching the basis of benefit allotments from the thrifty food plan, which is absurd and not really meant to be a long-term diet, looking at how the poverty, the federal poverty level is calculated and what a mismatch there is between the reality of household budgets and needed costs today as opposed to 1960 when it was so we're not having those conversations because we're working so hard just to put the brakes on the cuts.
So I wanted to explore those questions a little more. And first of all, thank you all for really terrific, although depressing talks. So I wanted to ask about sort of your thoughts on some options for reframing the questions and broadening the questions and the perils and opportunities of this moment. And Jan, you mentioned in passing that another way to think about food stamps, and especially as a benefit for the working poor, is a subsidy for corporations that pay low wages. And I think we've really seen just in recent months with the organizing of fast food workers and the organizing of Walmart workers that food stamps provide subsidies to these companies and other low-wage employers to allow their workers to survive and not organize and demand more benefits. And then on a second front, there was an article maybe 10 days ago in the Wall Street Journal that Walmart takes about 18% of the food stamp revenues. It's about $14 billion in food stamps goes to Walmart, it's the largest retailer. And I think we need to be asking is, do we want to be spending a significant portion of the $80 billion we spend on food stamps to paying Walmarts and Pepsi-Cola and Kellogg and the other big food companies that are associated with this dysfunctional food system? So do you think it's possible to raise these questions at the same time the traditional, admittedly inadequate, admittedly essential SNAP program is under attack? And if so, how do we do that?
It's a very sticky wicket. But, I mean, Walmart's growing share in the American food system affects not just SNAP recipients, it affects us all. I mean, and it drives smaller retailers out of business. It's part of this enormous trend toward concentration.
20%, almost 20% of food stamp revenues, but only 10% of all food stamps. So double.
Right.
among SNAP.
So they're overrepresented. Well, it's so convenient because their employees are the SNAP recipients, so they just shop and they're already there. No, but
Not wrong.
I do think. I mean, I think we can't, in the long run, cure poverty with food stamps, with SNAP. We have to have an incomes policy, and it has to embrace adequate wages and reasonable provisions for people when they can't or shouldn't work. Okay, setting that aside, do we want to take on the task of? I mean, I guess I have to back up, say, Nick, what could you envision that would be a way that we might try to redirect the SNAP investment? We've already tried to redirect it toward farmers markets with, some success, but how would we get it away from? I mean, what if the answer to your question is no, we don't want to use our tax dollars to subsidize a corporation that pays so poorly? And
Well, I think New York, especially in this period, maybe we have an opportunity for creating a much more public, nonprofit food sector, as some other places in the world have done, and to create incentives for people to use their SNAP benefits there. I think we've tried that a little bit with farmers markets and EBT and CSAs. Maybe New York could be a place that tries that on a whole different scale in this next period.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with that. I mean, our government was founded on this federalist system where states and cities were supposed to be the laboratories of democracy, right? Like, nothing ever starts in Congress. It gets to Congress when Congress can no longer avoid it. So, so starting local. I mean, I agree with you. That was going to be my answer. Starting local is where you build the momentum. Congress isn't going to take it until they have to.
And I think this question of subsidies is a really important one. And, I mean, the food system in the U.S. has long been subsidized in a lot of different ways. So, and I don't think necessarily we should be arguing against subsidies, but I do think we should be talking about what are we subsidizing, for what purpose. And this is where I really think that the public health stuff becomes an important issue in trying to really think about what are the salient questions and thinking about how to shift some of these subsidies. And I think, we've seen some of this, the health buck stuff and the farmers market nutrition program and that kind of thing. I think, sure, there's a lot of room to go on there. And I think when we talk about food stamps as a subsidy to corporations, the danger to that, and to me, is that it's, again, sort of, especially in the organizing campaign, I've had some questions about this myself, but I think it, again, draws the line between the working, deserving poor and the undeserving poor in a kind of dangerous way, that people who are working should not be getting subsidies. I don't necessarily think that's true, but I do think the point that you bring up about that those food stamp dollars are then being spent at Walmart is another issue that really could be a focus in terms of where are those dollars going? What are some ways that we can sort of incentivize or shift where those dollars are going in ways that benefit local economies, in ways that benefit more regional food sheds? And I think, some people are thinking along those lines, and that's sort of a promising direction. And I think, at the local level, there might be some potential there.
where's the mic? Okay, or do you want to shout?
When we started the food bank 30 years ago, it was at that moment when Reagan was arrived. People always say, well, why did you do that? And we did it because we saw what was coming down the road. But the problem, we also never thought that a food bank was going to solve the food problems or the food policy issues or poverty or unemployment or low employment, et cetera, et cetera. None of us had any illusions. Jan taught me many years ago about something called the opportunity cost. And you have to wonder about that. But I listened to this conversation where we're talking about some people would say esoteric discussion, but this thing, if it goes through, these kind of cuts go through, we are seriously talking about families and individuals going seriously hungry, maybe, I don't want to sound completely crazy, but I mean literally dying or becoming ill because of that. I don't know how we do this. How do you parse this kind of a thing? It just seems to me that for the moment, at any rate, and maybe this is the wrong way to go, but we have to do something to bring the attention of people in general in this city to what in the hell is really the impact of this stuff. And as long as there has been, because all you saw the last 10 years is building of luxury stuff, and nobody gave a damn about the growth of the homeless. And we've had this constant, but I don't know the answer, but I just think we have to either go to the newspapers and say that every damn day they have to put down in the newspaper the impact and how many people and all the rest of it. We have to, I don't know how to use social media. I don't even know what it means. But honestly, some people who do, these things go viral. How do we go viral with something like the information that we're talking about? We don't have to stand on street corners in the middle of the winter and hand out stuff, I understand. That's not done anymore. So I'm making light of some of this, but it really scares me to death. Well, the impact on people and what do we do to bring that attention?
Yeah, let's take one last comment, and then I'm mindful of the time that we have already officially run over. And so, go ahead.
I think that there is a lack of courage at the very top of the public health reporting effort of our government. My background is in the Johnson years. I was trained to write a state health plan, and there were state standards and metrics, and how we were going to accomplish it, who in the community was going to do what, by what metric, with what rationale. Well, I looked last year at Healthy People 2020. I tried to look for hunger. 2020 is the gold standard for U.S. public health. It was gobbledygook, and there was no alarm. Anyone with courage who knows how to write a true standard for public health in this country could have the metrics, could have the reporting system, and then it could be plugged into what you're suggesting.
And to answer the question over here, what can we do? Each of us can find the Kristen Gillibrands of the world and encourage them that they are doing the right thing by standing up against these cuts. Whatever language you want to use. My company was recently hired to try to develop some language that everybody can use. But in the meantime, let's all use everything we think about how horrible this is and encourage our policymakers who are in office now and who are dedicated to this issue to stand up and fight, that we have their backs, and talk to the local community in every way you can. Your Facebook, if you tweet, if you Instagram your food over the holidays, make a note that some people don't have food over the holidays. And that is how we can start, at least us in the room.
I want to make it clear that actually, whether you believe it or not, I'm an optimist. And I think the history that Jan relayed, if there's one lesson, for me at least, every time this comes around, and I kind of liken every seat of government to Stephen King's Pet Sematary. Bad policy ideas you think are dead and buried just come back uglier and meaner, and that happens. But every time we get better at fighting it. I wouldn't have gotten out of bed this morning if I weren't an optimist. So we are in a particularly bad moment. I'm looking straight ahead at Franklin Roosevelt's 4 freedoms, and number 3 is freedom from want. And part of me is appalled that we're having this conversation, 70 years later? But part of me also believes that we'll get there.